Power of the Dog is a Netflix movie which came out last year, but it kind of slipped through the cracks and I didn't get to review it at the time, so I'm coming back to it now. It's one I'm excited for because I've heard good things, but after watching it, I was kind of left going, Let's talk about why. Charismatic rancher Phil Burbank inspires fear and awe in those around him. When his brother brings home a new wife and son, Phil torments them until he finds himself exposed to the possibility of love. Now, this movie, as I mentioned, I've heard good things about. There's buzz about possible awards down the line. Potentially. Nomination, I'd say, is the best they can go for. It's a Western of sorts. It's not really, guns blazing and everything. But it is an interesting story. It's set in that time period, so you get all those visuals, the cowboy hats, the horses, the wooden buildings, all that. And the story is interesting. At times, I did find myself picking up my phone or having to snap myself back to attention, or even having to rewind the film because it wasn't keeping my attention a lot. But at certain points in the movie, I found myself really engaged. The movie's slightly over 2 hours long, but there's a point, I'd say about 30 minutes into the movie, onwards till about just before the last half an hour of the movie, where I was really locked in, engaged, and time whizzed by as I just fell into the story. But at the same time, I don't, off the top of my head, despite only watching it last night, remember too many big scenes. The movie doesn't have any what I would refer to as award-winning scenes. All these big movies that go for big awards, they have that one big scene that sticks with you. This movie doesn't really have that big scene. It goes with subtlety a lot. And I didn't look up the rating for this one, but I assumed the rating is like PG-13 because they keep it very low with the swearing and the violence and all that stuff. It's kept to a minimum. Not that that's a bad thing, it's just for this type of movie, might have watered it down a little bit. The performances from the actors is pretty good within the movie. It's a pretty good cast. Kirsten Dunst there, who's fantastic. Jesse Plemons, who I always find it's a little bit strange seeing him not as the bad guy, because he's always a bad guy for some reason. He plays a bad guy really well, but he was pretty good in this one too. Although for the latter part of the movie, I didn't see too much of him in it. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention. As I said, I picked up my phone a lot during this movie. Benedict Cumberbatch. The one thing I will say about Benedict Cumberbatch, he's a fantastic actor. But for me, and I always find this with Doctor Strange as well, his American accent is a bit terrible. But in saying that, his performance within this movie was pretty damn good.
Now, gentlemen, look, see, that's what you do with the cloth.
It's really just for wine drips.
Oh, you got that, boys? Only for the drip. Now get us some food.
I also noticed Thomasin McKenzie pop up in this movie in a very small role. She's like the helper in the kitchen, but she's been very active in the movie scene the last year. She was in Last Night in Soho. She was in Jojo Rabbit just a couple of years ago, which I only watched at Christmas. She was in Old, the M. Night Shyamalan movie. She was popped up a lot lately, and I think she's an actress we're going to see a lot of. But it was very strange to see her in such a small role, because I'd just seen her in a very big role in Last Night in Soho. But the story in this one, at times is very good, and at times is a little bit weak. It doesn't keep your attention. This movie could have done with about 40 minutes chopped off it, and you would have had a sensational movie. But instead, what you get is a pretty good movie, which is a little bit dragged out. Although the ending was interesting. So I'll throw up a spoiler alert here, just so we can talk about the ending a little bit. So ultimately, we get to the scene with Phil, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, and the young guy whose name I forget, and they're talking as Phil finishes the rope. And the scene ends where the two of them are staring off. It looks like something's going to happen between them. And then it cuts to black, which is very interesting because then we don't see the young guy, which leads me down a path of thinking, okay, Benedict Cumberbatch must have killed the young lad because he's clearly got something against Kirsten Dunst's character and he's trying to torment her. Surely the ultimate torment is kill her son. That would definitely drive her crazy, but maybe that was a little bit too obvious, and maybe that's what the film director was thinking because they clearly go another way. Benedict Cumberbatch gets a little bit more and more sick, and ultimately he ends up in a coffin. Definite spoiler alerts here. And we're left to believe that the kid who has been previously dissecting animals and talking about wanting to be a doctor and a surgeon has poisoned Benedict Cumberbatch, which is a smart little play from him. You could argue it comes out of left field, but at the same time it does fully make sense. Therefore, it's a good ending. Didn't see it coming, kind of makes sense. But at the same time, I think if Benedict Cumberbatch does go with the more predictable killing the son, because, you know, the son clearly found out something about Benedict Cumberbatch that he didn't want other people to know at that time. And then he has a reason for killing the son, and then the mother has this big breakdown at the end, and maybe she ends up killing Benedict Cumberbatch. You get this big, you know, this big finale where there's multiple people going after each other, and maybe even Benedict Cumberbatch kills the wife, and then Jesse Plemons has to face off with Benedict Cumberbatch, and it becomes a big, big fight ending. And, you know, maybe that's just me wanting violence in every movie I see, and maybe the subtlety of this one just worked. But for me, I just felt the ending could have had more to it. I get wanting to have the subtle ending and possibly go the way of the not predictable. I'm always saying the endings need to be not so predictable. But I don't think the ending of the son being killed for the reason it's being killed would have been predictable based on the way that the movie had gone. As I say, a lot of the stuff in this movie is a little bit watered down from what it could have been. And maybe I'm looking too much at what this movie could have been. For me, I just think the movie missed a little bit of a step. But at the same time, large parts of this movie are very enjoyable. Some of the performances are fantastic, the setting and everything is phenomenal. It's not one of the best movies I watched last year. It's a good movie. It's not a great movie. But even saying it's a good movie, I'm tentative to it. Because even when I sat down to think about what I'm going to say about this movie, I didn't have a whole lot to come up with off the top of my head. I really had to sit down and think about, okay, what happened in this movie again? It's a very forgettable movie. I think this time next year, I'll forget I even watched it. So ultimately, we get down to a rating out of 10 for The Power of the Dog. And this is one where I'm going to split a rating, actually go with a half rating, and we're going to go with a 6.5 out of 10. It's a movie to check out. It's an interesting movie. I'm sure a lot of people will love this movie, but it just leaves me with a bitter taste of what could have been.